Righty. Hi, folks. Thanks for joining us today. And you see the title in front of you, Plotting the Path Forward, Repurposing Therapeutics for CNS Conditions. We think this is an important topic and are glad to start beginning the conversation here on whether or not, repurposing therapeutics is a useful and fruitful way that we can go together to address the scarcity of options for meaningful treatments for people with brain disorders, neurological and psychiatric. And it's really important here that we engage you, our industry partners in collaboration, and our friends at Bio and Pharma. So just some logistical things. You're in a listen-only mode now. You could yell and scream. We won't hear you. But we would encourage you to ask questions. And the way you would do, and any time during the next hour. So the way you can do that is, if you're familiar with Zoom, there's a raise your hand icon. And if you want, we can unmute you and we can have you speak to the entire group for any timely questions that you have during this conversation. Otherwise, what you can do is there's a Q&A box and you can enter comments in that at any time and we will address them as needed, but there's a Q&A session at the end and we will address those comments. So just wanted you to be aware of that. If you have any questions, put them in the Q&A box. So now we get to the part about introductions. So I guess Katie, you'll want to change the slide. And so these are pictures of us. And you'll see me. I'm the ABC board chair. I'm the Francis and Edgar Reynolds Professor and Chair of Neurological Sciences at University of Nebraska Medical Center. I think Robin, who's joined us, is on the line. He's a founding member of the American Brain Coalition. He's the past chair, and he spent a lot of time over the past few years on the topic that we're going to be covering today, is acting as a task force chair, conducting meetings and phone conversations with intellectual leaders in the area. And Katie, who opened up the meeting and you see on the right, is leading and coordinating our efforts as the executive director of the ABC, and she's really good at it. So let's get to our esteemed legislative consultants. And we see here that we've been working with our friends at CRD Associates, and they're our legislative consulting firm, and they've been on this topic from the get-go. And I want to point out Lyle Dennis, who's the managing partner, right in the middle there, and with Megan Riley on the left, who's the vice president, and Becca Branham, the senior policy associate on the right. They've been doing a lot of research on how we meet this difficulty, this unmet need, and making strategic plans for moving forward. So I think here I'm moving to you, Katie, and you're on back.
Yes, I am. Thank you. I will be very brief. I just want to go show you and remind you of the ABC's mission and vision, which have changed slightly throughout the years. As you'll see, we really are an umbrella organization for the brain, bringing together, all of our nonprofit organizations, which I will show you moving forward, each of our membership broken down. But we really try to reduce the burden of brain disorders through education, public advocacy, and outreach. We have, as I mentioned, nonprofit members. I couldn't even list all of the organizations here, which I really wanted to do. We have almost 100 nonprofit members representing most brain diseases, as well as professional organizations as well. We have our academic institution category, which is getting larger as daily. So we're excited to work with a number of academic institutions. We also have a number of industry partners, and that's where you all come into play. And we're really proud and excited to work with all of our industry partners. And lastly, we have an observer category, which are our government agency friends, not formal members for obvious reasons, but we work very closely, especially with the NIH. We've started working very closely with FDA and then some of the other agencies as well. So I will turn it over to you, Robin. And Robin, I believe you need to start your video. There he is. And unmute yourself, Robin. Robin, you need to unmute yourself.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Good. Sorry. I'm Robin Elliott. Until a couple of years ago, I was in charge of the Parkinson's Disease Foundation, working in one very important area, obviously the brain science and brain research. And in the course of this, I was privileged to link up with Katie and Matt and the gang who created the American Brain Coalition more than a decade ago. So it's been a very, very important part of my professional life, and I think of the life of our field in general. We're very proud of what's happened. We're particularly proud that we've engaged, I think very successfully, the resources of our friends in industry, who are crucial partners, obviously, in this whole enterprise. So we welcome all of you today, and we thank you very much for being part of this very important series of questions we're raising as part of our long-range plan. When we began the ABC initiative back in 3, 4, 5 years ago now, 2015, we had 4 goals in mind, which are on your screen now. Increasing private sector investment in the CNS, which was an attempt to reverse what we saw as a slide, a very serious slide at that time, in the amount of investment that was being made by industry in the CNS research space. I believe the number that sticks in my mind is that at one point, with dollars held constant, it was about a 50%, 50% decline in investment by industry, which we believe, and in fact we're pretty sure, has nothing to do with industry's concern about brain research as opposed to other areas of research, but rather in the profitability, or should I say ease of access of the system in other equally perhaps important medical areas, but ones that in some respects are somewhat less daunting and less difficult than the CNS, which remains in everybody's book the hardest area of all to pull things off. So because of that decline in private sector investment, that really was the single most important reason ABC started. And we still believe it's the very important reason we keep going today. In the course of in the initial definition of our goals in 2015, there were 3 other bullet points in front of you now, looking at push-pull mechanisms to increase investment, enhancing public awareness of the need for private sector engagement, and also number 4 in enabling CNS-related partnerships to develop project initiatives to advance brain research and commercial development. So that was our original set of priorities for the American Brain Coalition and our individual partners among industry, nonprofit groups, and scientists. And now we're talking 5 years later, in 2020, about focusing this, following a couple of years during which we spent time thinking through what ABC could most profitably do in this field. We identified a series of goals as to this particular task force going forward. If I can get this slide changed, are you changing it, Katie? Okay, the unmet need. You're all familiar with this. It's a huge number of people, living with psychiatric and neurological disorders. Our estimate's 700 million, maybe a low estimate. And of course, this creates an enormous obligation, opportunity, and challenging target for our industry partners in looking at ways they can help intervene in this monster global challenge, the matter of brain research. Next slide, please. So to our ABC plan of action, in our 2 years of review of this, which involved several of you on this call today, directly or indirectly, as our partners in the discussion, we identified 4 areas for priority. Just one of those we're discussing today. I'll discuss that first and then pass it over to Matt to proceed from there. I'll use the exact words in bullet number 1. Explore the use of an adaptive approval pathway for repurposed therapeutics to incentivize CNS product development. In other words, drugs, ideas, magical imagination that's already on the drawing boards, already approved in many cases for different kinds of diseases, illnesses, related or unrelated, and finding ways then to readapt them for therapeutic purposes in the CNS area. And that's the piece that is our focus today. We had 3 other areas that will not be discussed today, I'm relieved to inform you, but appear on the slide. One is an economic question, the use of tax credits as a way, obviously with congressional approvals, it would be a major political issue, to advance research and development by giving companies that are doing this work the opportunity to save on their taxes while they're investing in neuroscience. That in these days of the last 6 months having changed our world in so many ways, this particular area probably is not on the drawing boards right now, but we want it to be definitely in part of the consciousness so that when the world eases up, as we certainly hope it will in months to come, this will be an area that could engage congressional and other interests in exploring the possibility of a door to open that would enable more neuroscience research. We also had point number 3, a health economic study to look at alternative mechanisms by which CNS product development could be encouraged. This obviously goes way beyond the skill set of ABC per se, but we friends in this field and friends who are related in this area, we would feel this be engaged to look at the economics of drug development and treatments development in the CNS area. And then finally, a sort of catch-all category, increasing collaboration across CNS partners and others involved in the health research business. So back to number 1, adaptive approval pathway for repurposed therapeutic enterprises. Can we have the next slide? I believe Matt, you're speaking to this.
Yes. So the question here is, why repurposing? And, we sort of didn't sort of draw this out of the blue. It's a potential fruitful and useful area for us. It's really expensive to develop new drugs. And that's been a particular problem and a key barrier to developing new therapeutics for CNS purposes. And there's data that it's costing billions of dollars in R&D cost to develop a single new nervous system agent, and this sort of comes from the Tufts. On top of that, it takes longer to approve CNS drugs than it does other drugs. They're much more expensive than sort of non-CNS drugs. However, unlike novel therapeutics, repurposed drugs and biologics, which might be used for the CNS, are less expensive to develop. They have a higher rate of approval, and the lower cost profile and the higher approval rate suggest that this is a wise area for investment. And there are other factors. One is that repurposed therapeutics have the benefit of pre-existing safety profiles that are known, at least for the conditions in which they were approved, and they can benefit from existing regulatory pathways that would be intended to shorten the approval process. So all these factors taken together suggest that it may be a useful path to pursue repurposing of therapeutics, that this would eliminate structural barriers to CNS therapeutic development, and we want to do everything that we can to help our constituents, and namely the patients who we ultimately want to serve. So I think there are good arguments for repurposing, and I think we'll hear now from Becca on the current state of repurposing.
Thanks so much, Dr. Rizzo. now that we've taken a little bit of time to establish why it is that repurposing is of such interest to ABC, we wanted to share with you the information we've gathered so far on what repurposing really looks like for the treatment of CNS conditions. Repurposing, while certainly a promising avenue for drug development that's captured the attention of policymakers in recent years, is by no means a new phenomenon. Of course, the most common kind of repurposing is simply the use of off-label prescribing for the treatment of conditions beyond the label indications. Off-label prescribing is, of course, very common, and particularly common for the treatment of CNS conditions, for which there's often limited treatment options. Of course, I don't need to tell this group that drug companies are rather limited in their ability to promote off-label uses, but off-label prescribing is indeed extremely common. And in fact, drugs approved for CNS indications are among those most likely to be prescribed off-label, which suggests to us that there may be more opportunities for formal approval of drugs to be repurposed for new indications. Unfortunately, there is not much by way of published data on repurposing specific to CNS conditions, but there is at least one study that establishes a baseline for us of the past few years of repurposing and what it might look like moving forward. So according to a study that was conducted by a review of regulatory filings and a literature review as of 2016, there were 118 source products that were either formally approved for repurposing or identified as candidates for repurposing for the treatment of CNS conditions. Of those 118 source products, most of the repurposing in the CNS space has been for the treatment of Alzheimer's, substance use disorders, depression, and bipolar disorders, which is perhaps an unsurprising grouping of diseases given their burden for patients and also the current focus of industry. Finally, the study suggests that when repurposing occurs for the treatment of CNS conditions, it's most likely that a drug will have initially been approved for a CNS indication and then approved for another CNS indication. Again, this is perhaps an unsurprising phenomenon given that research into underlying mechanisms for CNS conditions is ongoing, and many CNS conditions may share similar disease mechanisms for which a particular compound could be beneficial for multiple different indications. And so that's just a really brief overview of what we've found so far, information related to CNS-specific repurposing. And with that, I'll hand it off to my colleague, Meg, who's going to speak to federal efforts to address repurposing and repurposing specific to CNS conditions.
Thanks, Becca. As she said, I'm going to discuss a little bit about federal initiatives. So as part of our ABC I2 work, we met with NINDS and NCATS to better understand where repurposing fits within their priorities and to learn what resources they had available for industry and for researchers interested in addressing the burden of CNS diseases. The most notable resource for repurposing developed by NINDS is the NINDS Custom Collection, which holds more than 1,000 compounds known to influence brain activities. Harvard ICCB Longwood Screening Facility purchased the collection in 2006 and maintains its resources. Interestingly, NINDS has stated that it has moved away from repurposing in recent years, citing low levels of success in prior efforts to encourage repurposing for the development of CNS therapeutics. NCATS, however, still works on repurposing initiatives, though given its mission, NCATS invests more time and funding into translational efforts and does not, unlike NINDS, have a CNS focus. And with that, I think I'll turn it back to Robin, I believe.
Okay, so now we have the all-important discussion period and idea exchanging period with our good colleagues on this call. It's our feeling from the very beginning of this enterprise 5 years ago that the role of industry in particular as highly informed observers, participants, and in all sorts of ways experts, that this kind of thinking cannot go on without key and continuous involvement with our friends in this field. So this is really where I'm sort of turning it over in behalf of our panel to the broader audience at our call today. and asking you for your ideas, your thoughts as to what in the current enterprise that we're facing is either inhibiting the intelligent and thoughtful repurposing of existing medications, or is in some way discouraging the use of creative ways to make some of these things possible. And so this is really more an open-ended question than anything else. And I would hope that you would feel free to offer us your thoughts, your wisdom, your frustrations going forward here that could help us in the task force figure out how we can most profitably and practically apply this to a policy agenda. I should point out, Katie told me before the call that the plans are to have our staff, colleagues, and helpers from which you've already heard from today, to talk individually with our corporate advisors and participants, including, I think, everybody who's represented on this call. So there will be an opportunity for you one-on-one to share things with our staff people after this discussion is over. But we wanted to begin it by having kind of all-purpose, overall, kind of top of the line look at what's going on, and to share some thoughts that you may have that you feel you'd like others to reflect on or encourage to discuss. So the floor is really is yours to give us your reactions, thoughts before you join the call. How could we most profitably encourage a repurposing process that makes good use of existing, often highly invested medications, often for other purposes, into the CNS focus? Any thoughts, any suggestions, any questions?
And maybe Matt, we can also, Dr. Rizzo, maybe we can hear from you as well. Outline some of the, questions that we've had as well.
Yes, glad to do it. And I'm sort of looking at the folks on the line, and I think we have a lot of smart people who are probably thinking about things. And, maybe this is a good forum to sort of raise questions, and maybe some of you feel a little bit awkward doing that, around other folks who are also in the drug business. We understand that. But we appreciate all your thoughts. And reviewing the business case for repurposing, you see 3 bullet points up there. Is repurposing part of the answer for getting more therapeutics for CNS conditions? I think we've tried to make a case for why it may make sense in terms of reducing time, in terms of reduced regulatory burden, in terms of a proven safety already. Of course, we don't want to have a lamppost effect where we're looking for answers just where there's light. Another question would be, where does repurposing rank within industry priorities, given the apparent benefits that we've gone over? A third question is, what could be done, if anything, to make repurposing R&D, whether it's generic compounds or exclusive compounds, more feasible and attractive? So, we really would like to hear from you while you're on the line here on your ideas about a business case for repurposing and industry's overall interest. And, I think we pointed out before, there's the Q&A box, and you're certainly welcome to answer questions or to raise your hand. And I'm sure all of you have ideas about this. Earlier in the presentation, we talked about some of the benefits of repurposing, but there's been a lot less for CNS conditions than we might have hoped. But we do recognize that there's interest at the level of NIH. We have talked with Dr. Koroshetz and team at NINDS, and Dr. Chris Austin at NCATS, which runs the CTSAs, and who happens to have been a neurologist trained at Harvard, was also very interested in these issues in the neurosciences space. So we really would like to hear from you, and please enter any comments into chat, and please raise your hand. So that takes us to...
Dr. Rizzo, it looks like we do have one question that came up.
Okay, so I'm going into the chat box.
So go into the Q&A.
The Q&A box, yes. And thank you, Carter Esham. So I'm going to read your comment and question, and that is, to my mind, it's not a question of whether repurposing makes sense, but more a question of how would early screening of potential compounds be organized? Is this an individual company call to action, or a collaboration to test potential indication expansion? So I don't know the answer to that, and I would ask folks on the line if they have any comments. Anybody from CRD, would they like to comment on this?
Matt, I'll be happy to. It's a really good question because, and we're gonna need smarter legal minds than mine, Becca. Return to our one attorney here, as to where the antitrust rules apply and where they would not be relevant here. Early screening when something is pre-competitive, it seems to me would not be an antitrust problem. It would potentially be an opportunity for a collaborative effort, within industry to put together maybe it's a nonprofit group separate and apart from each company, but supported by the companies to do that early screening. That might be a vehicle to get past some of the early concerns here, so that one company doesn't undertake all of that burden and decide it's not going to undertake it because it's too much of a burden for a single company. I know that's a kind of an immediate off-the-cuff reaction, which may or may not be valuable.
And I'll add here too that I think one question that we have for the participants is another version of that question, which is essentially, we do know that there are existing resources to allow for that screening, the compound libraries and the like. And what we'd love to do, we might assign you a little homework to go home and see if you can find out to what extent those resources have been useful to you, and to the extent that they're not, what could be done to make them more useful, such that it's there's more organic incentive to do the repurposing research and R&D to identify those compounds that can be repurposed. And so I think there are resources that exist, but to the extent that they're not useful, we would love to know why, so that we can, ultimately our goal here is to get more products to get more treatments for patients. And so to the extent that we can make sure that resources are usable and useful for that research, we want to be able to do so.
I see that there, thank you so much, Robin and Becca. I see that there's another question, and this is from Robin Wojciechuk. I hope I pronounced your name all right. I knew a person named Joanne Wojciechuk who I worked with at Iowa. Maybe you're related. But anyway, Robin's question is, what are the thoughts around use of RWD to support repurposing? Real-world data can come from a variety of sources, including electronic health records, payer administrative claims, and patient registries, and so forth. With appropriate study design and analytic approaches, a real-world design can help to fill critical evidence gaps because of its ability to reflect the reality of routine medical practice that maybe already is out there. A real-world data it can also help provide evidence on a broader range of outcomes that may be more reflective of patients' perspectives and span a longer period compared to the traditional randomized clinical trials. Would just need to have the ability to set up such an infrastructure or to evaluate what is out there. That's a really interesting point of view. And I'm guessing that you're, and I don't know, and maybe Katie can unmute you, but I'm guessing you're thinking about mining the EHR, the electronic health record, looking at drugs that for comparable drugs for condition or in conditions in which they were not originally indicated, looking at equipoise, following it over time, and looking to see which has a better outcome and so forth. And I don't know if, Katie, you want to unmute Robin to see if he wants to give further exposition?
Sure. This is Robin. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, I hear you. Yes.
Yeah. And you did a great job on my last name. It's Robin Wojciechowski, so that was perfect.
Close, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm from Lundbeck in the regulatory affairs organization. So thank you for including me on this. And yeah, I'm just looking at it from the standpoint of just looking at some alternative data sources that from just an FDA perspective, you know, they're really opening up the, you know, the type of data. I think, you know, in reading some of the proposals, I think it would be very difficult to, outside of, you know, a conditional approval for FDA to really change the overall efficacy standards. But I do think there are ways, and this is something through in recent conversations just within pharma and bio, as we've been looking at what FDA has been doing with the pandemic and COVID, and being able to provide different means of collecting, you know, real world data to support even from an efficacy standpoint. So there may be opportunities or a work stream where we can think that through, especially for those drugs that are approved, how you can capture that data and be able to put forth a proposal that a traditional clinical trial is not warranted, but it's already out there.
I want to mention that there is an opportunity to sort of mine those great databases. And there's an effort right now that I actually am working on. It's with NCATS, and it's starting with this N3C Data Palace, which relates to COVID, but which can be expanded. So it's linking all the CTSAs, which come out of NCATS, which Chris Austin is the director of, and who we mentioned before that we're commiserating with, and in linking with NIGMS, which runs all the clinical and translational research centers across the country, which have access to many communities, many hospitals, both academic and community through practice-based research networks. So this possibility, I think, is beginning to emerge. And I think that's sort of in line with what you envision. And I don't know how we can advance this discussion a little bit further, but maybe it's something we could talk about a little more offline. But that's very exciting and maybe very relevant to this sort of innovation initiative and repurposing.
Yeah, great. Happy to help.
Thank you. Any other questions? I see some very esteemed names on the panel, on the list of attendees. And I know Andrew Sperling is online, and he is often has wise comments. I wonder, Andrew, do you have anything you wanted to say? Any advice?
Not necessarily advice, just, well, maybe a little bit of advice. And that is that the pace, as you mentioned earlier, Dr. Rizzo, the pace of discovery, particularly with psychotic disorders, has been very, very slow. The treatments we have out there remain largely palliative. We need improvements in side effect profiles, but repurposing is the most immediate route forward in terms of moving us down the road toward incremental improvement, particularly with atypical antipsychotic medications. But we can't take our eye off the ball of the long-term goals of actually getting, finally, one day, a disease-modifying therapy for particularly schizophrenia, but also other psychotic disorders, as well as mood disorders. We just still have a long way to go. We need to continue this progress by repurposing the existing compounds that are out there to get some advancement.
Thank you, Patrick. Anybody else? I see Patrick McCartney is on the line and often has some wise things to say. Patrick, any thoughts? Don't mean to put you on the spot.
Sorry, there, can you hear me? I wish I had some wise questions. I actually had to join late, unfortunately, so I missed a good chunk of it. I apologize. I had another last minute call come up. So nope, I don't have anything, unfortunately.
Okay. Anybody else? Any sort of additional details to complement what Carter has brought up, or Robin? Lyle, Becca, anything else?
One last bit of homework I might assign, and we quickly moved past this earlier in the slides, but I think given that we have some regulatory folks on the phone, if you'll recall back to maybe 15 or so minutes ago, we talked about the goals of the ABCI2 initiative, and the first one being exploring the use of an abbreviated or modified pathway for repurposed therapeutics. And I think an open question for us is the adequacy of the existing regulatory pathways. And so I don't know if you're able to speak to that now, but we are very curious to understand the adequacy of the existing pathways, to what extent there are any unique regulatory burdens for repurposed therapeutics, and what types of policies, if any, are needed to make the regulatory pathway for repurposed therapeutics a little easier, such that it removes some barriers to entry for repurposing research and repurposing generally.
Thanks, Becca. Meg, anything else that you wanted to say after having heard this discussion?
No, but I look forward to hearing what our partners provide in response to some of these questions, and look forward to talking with them.
Thank you. So I think we've had a pretty nice overview of this topic, a nice précis. I think it was put together pretty clearly, and I want to thank Katie and CRD for helping us with this. I think there are some pretty clear questions that we have posed. Potential action plans for the ABC in moving forward with this I2 initiative. Some questions about a path forward and pitfalls. And so to reiterate what Robin said before, we realize this is a big topic and there might be some sensitivities. And I think that we would like to be able to reach out to each one of you individually to ask for your further advice, thoughts, critiques on this topic, because we really hope that there's a path forward. Katie, do you want to augment that, or Robin?
Sure, I'll just say that we will be following up with you. So we will provide you with sort of the questions that we're hoping to get answered. We know that sometimes you need to speak with your colleagues and your leadership. And then we will hope to schedule some conversations. We were hoping to provide you kind of with this overview. Everyone could get this overview. We're recording it. We're going to send it out to those who couldn't join us today, so that we sort of have a background and a first step in sort of this discussion. Because if our industry partners like yourselves tell us this isn't going to work and this isn't an option, then we don't want to move forward with it. So this is sort of this beginning point. And then we hope to have some conversations. So let us know when I reach out to you and provide you with some of the questions. Let me know. Would it be better for us to give you a little bit of time to work with your leadership and your colleagues in your field and talk about what you can work with us on? Or should we just have a conversation that is maybe even offline, not recorded, that kind of thing? So I think that'll be the next steps that we'll be doing. and asking of you.
Thanks, Katie. Robin, did you have any final comments?
No, I think it's a very good beginning conversation, but stress for the next after talking with individual colleagues one-on-one. I see this as the preview, and the work will be done in that section. Thank you, everybody who participated.
So I want to reiterate, Robin, so thank you, friends. Thanks to our industry partners. Thanks to Bio and Pharma. We look forward to further dialogue with you. And, you know, we are looking for a path forward to help our patients. That's the ultimate goal. So I guess we're done. And we'll be contacting you soon. Bye-bye.